The subject of today's video in my series on the serial killers of the world is a particularly appalling and depraved individual by the name of Alexey Sukletin, a murderer, cannibal, and vampire who committed 7 murders between 1979 and 1985 in the Soviet Republic of Tatarstan. While a relatively obscure figure, as far as Russian serial killers go, he certainly deserves infamy as an utterly callous and degraded criminal. Alexey Vasilyevich Sukletin was born on 23rd of March 1943 in the city of Kazan. His father was killed in World War II before Alexey's birth, so he was raised by his mother who worked as a field medic, but she didn't instill universal ideals in him. It was already during the boy's childhood that his violent tendencies first manifested. In his book, The End of the Bloody Devil, Anas Batayev describes how Sukletin strangled a kitten at the age of 7 and burned a dog at the age of 9. However, there's no confirmation of this. There are also no refutations. Young Sukletin was a poor and disinterested student at school and started drinking as a teenager. In 1960, he attempted to assault a woman by knocking her out and pinning her to ground, but was thankfully interrupted by 2 men who apprehended the would-be rapist and took him to the nearest police station, along with his victim. Due to his young age and ostensible remorse shown at the trial, he was crying his eyes out like his mother and begging for leniency. Although he faced execution for rape, the judges handed down an extremely lenient sentence, just 2 years in prison. He was sent to a juvenile correctional facility. The charge under which the boy was sent to this not-so-remote place is, to put it mildly, considered disreputable. Sukletin was subjected to a full range of abuse, from stuffing his nose with toothpaste to beatings. Attempts to deceive the doctors and even get a short stay in the medical unit were unsuccessful. Prison did nothing to remedy the youth's antisocial tendencies, and after being set free in 1962, he soon committed another crime. This time around, he convinced 2 acquaintances of his to rob an elderly woman's apartment. The trio introduced themselves to the owner as maintenance workers, and after being let inside, knocked her out and took 80 rubles. However, their luck quickly ran out as the woman soon regained consciousness and contacted the police, providing them with enough details of her attackers to get them detained a few hours later at the nearest bar. As Sukletin was a repeat offender, he got a lengthy 12-year sentence. To make the stint more comfortable, Sukletin became an informant for the prison authorities, telling on inmates who broke the rules. For that, he was considered part of the lowest possible caste by his fellow prisoners, who held him in contempt, beat him up, and even sexually assaulted him. But he read many books in the colony and later used his erudition to seduce women. He failed to secure an early release and left prison in 1976, exactly 12 years later. At 33, Sukletin had spent half of his life behind bars and lacked formal education or work experience, so his prospects were looking decidedly grim. He got a job as a worker for an insurance company, but never went to work, and then as a guard for a horticultural association, from where he was fired for frequent absences. In 1978, he became a medical orderly in a psychiatric hospital. While he managed to get married in Kazan, he was clearly not made for family life, cheating on his wife, striking her in fits of anger, and eventually leaving her after finding out she was pregnant. He moved to a nearby village called Vasilyevo and soon got hired as a guard at a community garden. It was there that Sukletin met his future accomplice. The 23-year-old beauty Medina Shakarova simply laughed when a 36-year-old former convict working as a security guard asked to meet her. She came from a working-class family. Her mother and father had worked at the factory their entire lives. She barely finished school and lived in Uzbekistan for a time. Medina got a job, first at a factory and then at a farm, and soon fell in love with a man called Rashid. The two got together, but after it turned out that Medina was pregnant, he insisted on her getting an abortion. She refused, and Rashid left her, which caused the young woman to contemplate suicide before deciding to carry on for the sake of her daughter. Then she returned home to Kazan, working first as a lathe operator's assistant, then as a lathe operator at the factory. A slender, dark-skinned girl with huge eyes, she made young men fall in love with her literally at first sight. But she didn't like anyone. This one was a hard worker, nothing to talk about. This one was unattractive, and that one, well, just... She met Sukletin in 1979, and despite the man's alcoholism and moody nature, The insecure, poorly educated single mother was impressed by his apparent knowledge of literature and decent manners. It wasn't long before she left the baby to be raised by her parents and moved in with Sukletin. So how it happened that the security guard started living with her so soon after they met remained a mystery even to the girl herself. Several years later, she said she felt as if she'd been hypnotized. Sukletin was unhappy with the meager wage he was earning as a guard, so he talked Medina and a friend of his called Rinat Volkov into pulling a blackmail scheme. The woman would travel from the village to the city and take a taxi back late in the evening. During the drive, she would complain to the taxi driver about her unhappy marriage and eventually invite him to the house for intimacy. Important clarification: Medina had to look great, put on makeup, do her hair, and dress up. She had to complain to the driver about her jerk of a husband who'd gone off to see women again. And then she had to make the driver want to stay the night. And then it's a matter of technique, Sukletin said with a smile. If the driver agreed, they would go to bed only to be suddenly discovered by Sukletin and Volkov playing the roles of Medina's husband and brother respectively. They would pretend to be taking photos of the lovers in bed and blackmail the driver into paying them 200 rubles, lest the photos were made public. "I'll give you as much money as I have, just let me go," the young man begged. They took all his money, after which he brought back about 200 rubles more. The scheme was successful, but Sukletin eventually got bored of extorting money from taxi drivers and decided to escalate his crimes, acting on his darker, more violent urges. It's unclear where his taste for human flesh originated from, but his two biggest heroes were Jack the Ripper and cannibalistic Central African dictator Jean Bedel Bokassa. One day, Sukletin told Medina that he wanted to take the life of her friend Ludmila, which Medina initially thought was a joke. After Ludmila came over and Sukletin became intimate with her, he gestured to Medina that he was about to kill the visitor, at which point the terrified woman asked Ludmila to leave. That infuriated Sukletin, who proceeded to beat Medina black and blue, after which she became even more subservient to him. In November 1979, or 1981 depending on the source, Sukletin met a woman called Ekaterina Osatrova at the Kazan train station and invited her back to his house in the village. Medina Shakirova was waiting for them inside, and when the pair emerged from the bedroom having had physical relation, Shakirova, offering her a drink, distracted the victim, while Sukletin struck her on the head with a hammer wrapped in a rag, stunning her. He then placed Osatrova in a trough brought by Shakirova and slit her throat with a knife and started drinking blood from the wound, ordering Medina to do the same. After the woman's heart stopped beating, he hung her corpse and mocked her, before cutting off the soft tissues and eviscerating the internal organs, with Medina's help. The remaining blood was disposed of in the bath. Sukletin then ate her heart, liver, and lungs. Shakirova then prepared borscht and pelmeni from the remains, which she ate together with Sukletin, with some of the remaining meat being fed to their dogs. After the gruesome feast, he realized he had a taste for human flesh. "We like the female breast the most," Medina Shakirova would later tell investigators. "Very soft and tender meat." The couple buried the victim's bones under a water tower. New Year's 1980, a new decade. But apparently, that was where everything new ended. Alexey hadn't given up on the idea of getting some meat. In early January, he and Medina met two girls at the station and suggested they celebrate the new year together. They drank and hung out. To avoid having to catch a ride, they suggested Tatiana and Elena stay until the morning. That night, Medina was awakened by a strong blow. Her common-law husband had quietly called her into the kitchen. Tatiana lay there, dead. "I didn't touch the second one, she's too skinny," he explained, cutting up the body and putting the pieces away in the cold. "She'll wake up and be gone." Luckily, the girl didn't wake up until the morning. She was told that her friend, Tatiana, had urgently left for Kazan, but they didn't wake her. She was sleeping so soundly. Elena couldn't have imagined that her thinness had saved her life. After the pair got rid of Elena, Medina went to a local store and bought a tape recorder using Tatiana's passport, while Sukletin carved the victim's meat and sold it to the neighbors under the guise of pork. Later, when asked why he became a cannibal, Sukletin replied, "It was interesting. I love women. I feel good in bed with them. I wanted to try what they taste like." Apparently, Sukletin liked it and began acting deliberately. He sent Shakirova to the Vasilyevo station to meet the victim and bring her to the guardhouse for a drink. One of the girls was a vocational school student, notes Shakirova's lawyer, Boris Rybak. She had no mother and lived with her alcoholic father. To escape the oppressive atmosphere, she went to college. In February, 15-year-old Rizeta Galimova was lured to Sukletin's house. The girl had just enrolled into a university in Kazan and was looking for a place to stay, so Sukletin promised to help. Sadly, after Rizeta entered the cannibal's house, she was assaulted and bludgeoned to death with a hammer. The girl was pleading for Medina's help, but Shakirova ignored her and even wore the victim's blouse after her death. The rest of the clothes were burned. In March, Sukletin brought home 22-year-old Nadezhda Sityavina, whom the killer had taken a liking to and even considered dumping Medina for. Soon afterwards, however, he took the life of Nadezhda in a fit of anger, keeping some of her meat in the fridge and selling the rest to the neighbors, while Medina got a new blouse to wear. One day, Nadezhda's friend came from Kazan, inquiring about the missing woman, and noticed Dina wearing Nadezhda's clothes. Sukletin figured she knew too much, so he silenced her as well. By spring, Sukletin had killed and consumed 5 women, but his appetite was far from sated. At the same time, his relationship with Medina Shakirova was becoming increasingly strained. In May, the cannibal was visiting Kazan when he spotted 11-year-old Valentina Elikova buying some ice cream. Introducing himself as the girl's uncle, he invited her back to his house and was so convincing that Valentina eventually agreed to go with him. The sight of a child was too much for Medina, and she attacked Sukletin in an attempt to save Valentina, but was beaten up herself. For some reason, Sukletin decided to keep the girl alive for a while, so one day when he was out, Dina tried to put her on a train to safety. Unfortunately, Sukletin intercepted them on the way to the station, brought them back to the house, and beat Medina into unconsciousness, while Valentina met the same fate as the previous victims. According to other sources, this last episode did not happen, and Sukletin knocked out Medina and murdered the girl as soon as the two came back from swimming in a nearby lake the same day that Valentina arrived to the village. The breaking point for Shakirova came shortly after, when Sukletin ordered her to go out and kidnap a baby for him to eat, which in her mind put her own baby daughter in direct jeopardy. Again, there's conflicting information saying that the baby episode happened in March that year, shortly before Sukletin's birthday, in which case it was the Valentina Elikova murder in May that became the last drop for Medina. In any case, she gathered up her courage and left to live with her parents. Sukletin wasn't worried about her going to the police, and instead found a new girlfriend in 23-year-old Lydia Fyodorova, whom he met through his drinking buddy and Lydia's relative Anatoly Nikitin. Sukletin was aware of the fact that he needed a new accomplice, so at some point he confided Lydia in his activities, presenting his murders as public service meant to rid society of its dregs. To the killer's chagrin, Lydia not only refused to help, but eventually started to blackmail him, threatening to alert the police unless he provided her money to fuel her alcoholism. Deciding that Lydia had become too dangerous, Sukletin conspired with her own relative Nikitin to get rid of her. On 12th of March 1985, the trio were drinking at Sukletin's when suddenly the two men turned on Lydia and proceeded to sexually assault and murder her. After burning her clothes, they dismembered the body, ate some of it, and got rid of the remains by placing the head into a vat filled with water and hiding the bones in a nearby shed. Sukletin then contacted Medina Shakirova. She and her parents lived in the same village, and despite having been regularly abused and threatened by him, the woman still inexplicably decided to come back to the village, where she helped conceal the traces of Lydia Fyodorova's murder. Soon after, Lydia's family went to the police, saying she had gone missing. Having established that the woman had recently moved in with Sukletin, the police paid him a visit and even briefly searched the house but didn't find anything suspicious, and were satisfied with the explanation that Lydia had left in an unknown direction after a spat. However, the cannibal's days as a free man were numbered. In June 1985, Sukletin was drinking with a friend called Gennady Uglov, when suddenly Uglov asked him about Lydia's disappearance. The drunk Sukletin then blurted out that he had murdered and eaten 7 people, which Uglov didn't take seriously. Sukletin then suggested that they kill Medina together and eat her heart, but Uglov waved it off as a joke as well. To prove just how serious he was, Sukletin took Uglov outside and showed him the vat containing Lydia Fyodorova's head. The horrified Uglov stayed silent for the moment, but while the two continued their binge in Kazan, he took an opportunity to lose Sukletin in a crowd and rushed to the police. However, the law enforcement considered his story little more than drunken ramblings and didn't follow up on it. The next day, Sukletin, who had become suspicious, invited Uglov over and tried to kill him, hitting him on the head with a champagne bottle. The injured man managed to escape, however, and made his way to the hospital where the concerned doctors called the police. When officers arrived to Sukletin's property this time, they instantly felt a nauseating stench and quickly discovered the head in the vat, as well as a piece of human skin in the garden. Inside the house, they found the victims' passports and personal belongings. The cannibal's fridge contained human meat and half a bucket worth of rendered human fat. Despite no traces of blood, a nail was discovered upon which Sukletin hanged his victims' bodies, as well as slabs and knives used for dismemberment. It took 3 days and a whole company of soldiers to unearth the remains buried all over the garden, which in the end amounted to 4 bags worth of bones. Sukletin was immediately arrested, followed by Medina Shakarova a few hours later. After news had spread about Sukletin being a cannibal and a murderer, the locals burned his house to the ground and turned the place into a dump site. During the interrogation, Sukletin confessed to killing Lydia Fyodorova, but initially denied any other wrongdoing, until he was told that more remains had been found in his garden, at which point he admitted guilt in the other murders as well. However, he never showed any hint of remorse, proudly insisting that he was cleansing society of amoral elements. He even gifted one of the detectives an autographed photo of himself with the inscription, "To remember your first meeting with a cannibal." He called the kids meatballs. Literally across the street from the cannibal's house lived a gardener who often saw Sukletin watching the children running past him. He'd say after them, "Wow, what meatballs are running around," recall the old-timers. We thought he had a peculiar sense of humor. But Uncle Lesha wasn't joking. During the investigation, Sukletin opened up to the police and told them about his deepest desire, to have a baby for breakfast. During his time in jail, he bragged about being a cannibal to other inmates in an attempt to impress them, but was quickly beaten up the same way he was during his very first stint in prison. As for Medina, who was kept at a local monastery for her own safety, she only admitted to covering up Lydia Fyodorova's murder at first, but after being threatened with capital punishment for her part in the killings that Sukletin had just confessed to, she started to talk for fear of making her daughter an orphan. "I never killed anyone myself, though I admit that I was Sukletin's accomplice. I prepared warm water, and after the murders, I helped string the bodies up for dismemberment. I carved the meat. I used the meat for cooking. I cleaned the house after the murders to conceal traces of blood. Took some of the dead people's belongings, coats, skirts, sweaters, shoes, felt boots. I only took the good stuff. We burned the bad stuff," is an excerpt from her testimony. The girl wrote that Sukletin could eat her own mother, that he was the devil himself, and so on and so forth and so on. She said she was afraid of the maniac, or more precisely, of being eaten. Better to be shot. He mixed threats with stories about the girl being chosen, with stories about some kind of initiation into something mysterious. After Lydia's brutal murder was proven, it became clear that capital punishment was inevitable. The most that could be done was to postpone it. Then Sukletin began making sensational confessions, one after another. Moreover, the murders concerned not only Tatarstan, but many other republics as well. The cannibal calculated that the investigation would take a long time, and further confessions would only delay the execution. However, investigators denied inquiries made throughout the Soviet Union about whether there had been particularly brutal murders outside the village. As a result of painstaking work, it became obvious that the statements in question were false, they later wrote in his case file. Meanwhile, Shakarova confessed to complicity in 5 murders. Sukletin tried to feign insanity, claiming memory lapses, but all forensic examinations declared him sane, with coherent speech, albeit a little slow. He repeatedly admitted that he felt no pity for the victims. His only regret was knowing he would face the harshest punishment. Along with Sukletin and Shakirova, the police also arrested Anatoly Nikitin, who helped the cannibal kill his last victim, as well as Rinat Volkov, who took part in the extortion scheme. Sukletin, Shakirova, and Nikitin were transferred to Moscow, where they underwent psychiatric evaluation and were all deemed fit to stand trial, to Sukletin's great surprise. Shakirova was diagnosed with alcoholism and psychopathy-like personality changes, whereas Sukletin was noted to possess psychopathic personality traits such as egocentrism, heightened excitability, cruelty, and vindictiveness. Are you not afraid of God, Sukletin? Of Judgment Day? Haha, what do I care for God? I'm my own God and devil. To be honest, I am afraid of death. Don't feel like dying right now, haven't lived long enough. Beat it with your Judgment Day. The trial lasted for a month, with Sukletin behaving in a calm manner and even being allowed to smoke in the courtroom so as to coax a confession out of him. He relished the details of his crimes, refusing to believe that he could be executed for killing prostitutes and alcoholics, but was always adamant that he never sexually assaulted his victims. Unsurprisingly, however, he was sentenced to death by gunshot. His last wish was to have a meeting with Medina, during which he asked for her forgiveness and gave her an apple. Sukletin was sentenced to capital punishment on July 29, 1987. Before his execution, the Zelenodolsk cannibal fashioned women's shoes out of bread and presented them to the prosecutor's investigator, along with a photograph and the caption, "I hope these are from the last cannibal in Tatarstan." As for the others, Shakirova and Nikitin were sentenced to 15 years in prison, while Volkov received 7 years. Medina was spared from a death sentence because she didn't commit any of the murders, was coerced by Sukletin into being his accomplice, and showed remorse for her part in the crimes. She served her sentence in 2 prisons, but wasn't treated well in either. At first, other inmates provoked Shakirova and beat her up, giving her the derisive nickname, Medina the Meat Grinder. After she was transferred to another prison, she was boycotted and ostracized by the prisoners. Despite being released in 2001, Medina was unable to break the cycle of misery, coming back to the Vasilyevo village, where she was shunned by her relatives and neighbors. She married again, but her husband was an alcoholic like Sukletin. Medina Shakirova died sometime after 2008 from alcoholic cardiomyopathy. Her body was discovered near Kazan train station.